welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Today, the future of the patent is still a white-hot issue. What does that play in the ATC's meeting with Racing New South Wales? Is the VRC staging a financial turnaround? And Racing Queensland's search for a chairman is underway. We also have a detailed interview with experienced racing executive Charlotte Mills about leadership in racing. In Breeding and Bloodstock, WA stallions get their chance to shine. An unfortunate end for a Melbourne Cup winning stallion. The economics of standing stallions and questions of fertility. And in wagering, no gambling out of reform in sight. WA backs a national tote. Entain's NZ commitment continues to strengthen, and does turnover cure all? Tim, a lot of issues to cover this week, but we'll start out. It's the time of year where political issues tend to come to the fore within racing, and internationally we're seeing some movement within this patent discussion, which has obviously been a dominant theme of the past probably, probably honest, the past 9 years, but certainly the past sort of 12 to 18 months.
Yes, that's an understatement, Bren. It's just when you think it's dying down, something else happens, or look, hopefully there's a story up on the Straight at some point the next couple of days. I believe there's a Asian Patent Committee meeting on Friday. Understandably, no one's certainly from Racing Australia or Rob Brewis, and there's the Australian Racing Australia delegate. Understandably, he's not talking, and Andrew Harding, I've gone to him as well, and he's not saying anything, and that's absolutely their prerogative. That probably won't get resolved if they if they go to the media. So they're keeping their powder dry, so to speak, in that regard. But I believe there is a meeting tomorrow, and what that entails, only time will tell, I guess. But certainly, I imagine Australia and its participation in the international patent, for want of a better term, would form part of that meeting or discussion. Normally there is a meeting around International Week in Hong Kong, and there may still be, but this is sort of a separate meeting, I believe, what I've been told anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot at play here, and obviously it's an international issue as well as a local issue. We sort of pointed that out in an article this week, but the broader chat or the broader sort of discussion is like, the ultimate thing that could happen here for Australia is it could effectively be downgraded to Book 2, Part 2 of the international cataloguing standards, which would be an absolutely slap in the face for local bloodstock values. Look, that's the big threat, I suppose, Tim. I mean, how real do you think that risk is that might happen?
Look, I think it's highly, someone said trillion to one, but I'd probably want 50 cents on a trillion to one, but it's still extremely unlikely. I'd like to think that, as we've discussed a lot, the issues Australia's got is it is a state-based, Racing Australia is a state-based organisation, so they've got their own prerogatives, and that's fair enough, but trying to get them all to agree. I think what's lost in this is patent or black type races are important for states and Group 1s, and that tradition, and also wagering outcomes, I guess, but it's also a big bloodstock valuation is effectively what it is, and used internationally, and it could, if that unlikely scenario happened, it could be a huge drain on international investment in Australia. Someone suggested that international players have got, upwards of 7 billion invested in the Australian industry. So, if that was to be devalued in any significant way, it would have a massive effect. And I'm saying it's unlikely to happen, but it's still potentially a scenario, and hopefully everyone can get on the same page eventually.
Yeah. And to be fair, though, they can't even get the same page to agree how this all happened to start with, whether it was through some issues around vetoes being thrown by the states, or whether it was issues around competition stuff and various other aspects. It's a complex issue, Tim. I guess that's the point of it. But it'd be good to see some steps taken towards resolution on that. Speaking of resolutions, key meeting today between Racing New South Wales and ATC. As we're recording, we don't know the outcome of that meeting, so I won't preempt what will happen, but keep an eye on the Straight, and we'll do our best to talk about that, Tim. But just quickly, a sort of, just let the listeners know, what do we expect to be on the agenda in that meeting?
Talking to various people, and I know you wrote something earlier in the week as well, Bren, that I don't know if there'll be, again, I'm not preempting whether there'll be an outcome today, but it's sort of, I know some people hoping it's just a meeting okay on both sides. What do you want out of this race in New South Wales and ATC, vice versa? And excuse me, maybe there's some steps forward that they can both work on to progress. The ATC's situation. They say they're in good financial and governance situation or position, I guess. Just whether Racing New South Wales wants to pull the trigger and put them into administration, which who knows what the ramifications for that really are. We won't know until if it does happen, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably one of those ones probably got to roll on for a bit, but definitely an issue that's bubbling along. In Victoria, the VRC showed some improvement on their bottom line this week. Team, you wrote a story on this week. It was still a $7.2 million loss, a comprehensive loss, 6th straight year in a row they've had that. But on the way back, a $17 million turnaround on last year. Kylie Rogers, the CEO, has clearly made some changes there, and there probably is a feeling that while the VRC still has some red ink on the balance sheet, it's still, it is a sign of improvement, and they're working their way back towards being a sort of, a profitable entity on a year-on-year basis, Tim.
Yeah, they've obviously that reports last financial year. The Spring Carnival, by reports, has been healthy instead of wagering turnover and crowds. Overall, crowds at Flemington this spring were up marginally on last year's 4 days at Flemington. And overall, the membership revenue, and they are decreasing costs. Obviously, that last financial year, Kylie Rogers made a lot of positions redundant and reshaped the executive and how it's all structured. So that takes a while to come to fruition and pave the way. So they say they're on the right path, and I guess in 12 months' time we'll be clearer to what that looks like.
Yeah, and it's interesting things. The other story we covered earlier this week was that Racing Queensland situation where they're still waiting for the outcome of the review conducted by Matt McGrath into Queensland Racing. It was supposed to release in early October or mid-October. Still waiting for that to come out. There's maybe a hint that it may come out by the end of the year, but there's still some things to be sorted out through there. The delays in the announcement of that report are causing some headaches in Queensland racing, including some funding stuff and I guess some broader certainty. But I was told by a representative this week from the racing minister that they are progressing forward with replacing the chairman of Racing Queensland. Steve Wilson ended his tenure on October 31. So at the moment, I think Jane Seawright, her name, is the acting chairman at this stage, but they will at least replace Stephen on the board, and then work out who will be leading that board going forward. So at least some movement there for Queensland, but there's probably a few other things which are a concern as well. So interesting situation there. And joining us now on Straight Talk is experienced racing executive Charlotte Mills. Charlotte is currently fresh into a new consulting role with New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, having recently finished up at Moonee Valley Racing Club in the role of Head of Racing. Charlotte's previously worked for RWWA as well as key roles in Tasmania and Victoria. Charlotte, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Bren and Tim.
So we're going to talk about the general concept of leadership in racing. It's a really consistent theme of discussion within the industry at the moment. Since the start of last year, we've had 3 of the state-based PRAs with new chief executives. New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing has a new chief executive. We have new CEOs at the ATC, the VRC, the MRC, and the BRC. So the turnover at the top, in every organisation, every industry has its turnover. But I guess we'd love to dig in and chat why this merry-go-round occurs. But first of all, I want to speak to you about, I guess, the leadership qualities that you admire and what you look to execute yourself on. And what does good leadership look like for you within the racing industry, Charlotte?
I think I've been lucky enough for the last 20 plus years to be surrounded by some good leaders, particularly in Principal Racing Authority land. My time both at Racing Victoria and Rowe in particular gave me great exposure to leaders. I think the qualities that I look for, definitely a level of authenticity. I mean, that's just something that you can't go without. I don't work well with pretense, and I think truth and honesty just can't be underestimated when it comes to how management structures are actually sustained. So I think for me, I love the commercial acumen because I think that's critical. particularly coming from a wagering background at Rowe. We needed that, and we certainly had that with both CEOs that were there, and Richard Burt and Ian Edwards, obviously there currently. I think one element and one trait that I really look at is vulnerability. A lot of people talk about the strength of leaders, the power of leaders, but I think being really open and honest and vulnerable is a huge strength in leadership that's often missed too easily.
So that, Charles, that experience around those leaders, has that sort of shaped your own way you mentor or lead in, provide your own leadership, I guess?
Yeah, it has, Tim. I've certainly been, when I say fortunate, particularly at my time at Racing Wagering WA, where I started off in the area of distribution, funding, planning, writing strategic plans for 3 codes. One code I'd had experience in, the other 2 codes, harness and greyhounds, I had to get up to speed pretty quickly with. So I really needed the support and I guess the experience of those around me in both those codes in particular, and the industry itself, to support what I was doing in those areas. I had general managers of racing who certainly pushed me forward. And when I say push me forward, put me in front of the board to experience, the presentation of ideas and concepts. And I think certainly that's rubbed off on me. I get a great thrill out of being around people with great talent. And I certainly want to see them succeed. That's more important for me than my pathways. Somewhat irrelevant in terms of destination. It's more about the journey with people that inspires you along the way. And I see lots of young people at the moment who've got great intentions, great passion, and it's making sure that you're doing your job to harness that and put it in the right direction and make sure that they're getting results.
What's your view? What's the biggest misconception about leadership in the racing industry, Charlotte? What are the things we sort of, we see as leadership, which you believe not necessarily are the best attributes?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions out there is that leadership is power. It's about making decisions, and yes, often that does come with that huge responsibility of making decisions. But I think leadership's far more than that. It's not the loudest voice. It's actually leaning into the tough, unpopular decisions. We've seen, you mentioned the merry-go-round of CEOs in various quarters around the country, and arguably a level of silence when we need loud voices on certain issues, very public issues, very socially driven political issues, and we don't seem to have that level of harmony. One thing I would say with racing that I've noticed over the years is the most united we've been was during COVID, when we had to survive and we had to make quick decisions, and we just had to work collectively and collaboratively to make it work. But even then, each state and territory was arguably working independently because we didn't have the time for a national approach to it. And each state was very different. You saw that in Tasmania with the cessation of racing there. And I think New Zealand also had a similar experience. So not everyone's working together, yet we've all got the same challenges. So I dare say my approach at the moment is, or my observation at the moment in terms of leadership, is that a lot of the leaders out there, not many people would want those roles, I'll be honest. Administration is not easy with the amount of challenge that's ahead. But I also think that you have to be brave with your voice. And I think in saying that, make some tough decisions. Popularism doesn't pay the bills, and popularism won't drive revenue up by any means. You cannot make everybody happy. And I think just the long-term planning is something that I'm concerned about. There's a lot of change apparent. There's a lot of warning signs that have been there for some years, particularly in the gambling advertising space. We're talking a lot about it, but the doing is very difficult because it's almost impossible to get everyone on the same page. And I think that's very obvious from a national point of view.
On that, then, how do leaders, as we know, we put it on the straight recently, and Ian Edwards has come under fire from the trainers, big name trainers over there, for what they perceive as major issues, insurance and different things. But how do good leaders, or get through that populism and balance it all to try and keep the industry afloat and going forward? Because it's certainly not easy.
I think one of the most impactful elements that I've noticed over the years is sharing the challenge. When you deal with stakeholders in isolation, each stakeholder obviously sees their priorities as the most important priorities, and to them they are. But in terms of a racing administrator, you've got to appreciate whether it be tri-code, whether it be breeders versus owners versus trainers versus jockeys. Everyone has their priorities, but there's only one bucket of money to go around, and that return on investment, and that, you'll hear many stakeholders talk about, well, without us it doesn't exist. It's without all of us that it doesn't exist, and we all play a part. So I think in terms of ensuring that everybody actually has input, but also has knowledge of other priorities from other stakeholders, those sorts of discussions have started to happen. You can see racing forums, consultative groups. They do happen, but they've got to be driven by an agenda that's got outcomes. And I think the greatest fault of racing and the ease at which we do it is we have a lot of talk fests. And actually getting things done is so important, and we're running out of time to knock over some really big ticket items. And I think when you look at the likes of an Asian Racing Conference, you look at the likes of symposiums, what are the end results? What did we achieve since the last one? And I think that performance management piece within administration needs to be well looked at or revisited, so that all administrators are on notice to ensure that when we return to that forum, we've actually achieved.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, I guess, and you go to a lot of these conferences and you talk about the same things year after year. You do, like, it's the same issues. You go, oh yeah, and you have maybe slightly different perspectives on it, but has it progressed? I mean, do you think that why do you think that in terms of racing's leaders, why do they avoid sort of tackling those issues of long-term sustainability? Do you think they're obviously difficult and complex. Is it the nature of the industry that's it's so results based, it's so vibe based in some ways. You get a good result, you get a good horse, you get a champion come along, it changes the nature of it. That longer term thinking, as Tim sort of alluded to before, and you spoke about it in length, it might be popular, but it might not necessarily be effective longer term.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because one element of change and progress that I would definitely say has been a credit to the industry globally has been welfare. Yeah. Welfare of horses has been a priority, as it should be, and you can certainly see the right people coming into the right roles across PRAs, across jurisdictions, and that true reveal of what the industry does do in the animal welfare space. I think that's one area that has definitely got traction and momentum. When it comes to the wagering challenges, and obviously we were at the recent Backing the Punt conference, I certainly found this year that there was more discussion on regulatory environments, which is very topical and has evolved since last year's discussion. But I think from a racing point of view, perhaps we get too distracted with a lot of noise. And that point about the unpredictable nature of the great horses and the horses that the general public might like to follow, the engagement of broader audiences, the on-course challenge, the government approach to taxing, and the limit. Have we maxed out in certain states, in certain areas, in terms of the product and what people are prepared to pay for it? I think, yes, it's complex. Yes, there may not be an easy solution, but I think we've actually got to start putting milestones on results. And to be honest, I look at Australia as the industry itself is getting smaller, not bigger. And the recent discussion about the loss of two codes in New Zealand and Tasmania over time tells us plenty about the political power and the social influence that is hitting the industry and has been for some time. So those decisions and those big ticket items, I think we need to start pushing forward, and the idea of, and I talked about harmony before, it's an impossible harmony. but the idea of us working state to state independently certainly doesn't support any efficiencies, doesn't support any reduction in cost. And I think we're all battling the same challenges. So one brain overseeing all of those challenges certainly makes more sense in a national context.
Yeah, it seems good.
How much of, sorry, Bren, you go.
No, go on, mate. That's yours, Tim.
No, sorry. How much of leadership within racing can be measured by legacy and what you leave behind, and how much should be determined by what you achieve when you're in the chair?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tim. I think legacy is perhaps a bit of an overstated desire by a lot of leaders. I think your legacy should be personally relatively quiet. Others may notice it. How you've left a place is how people feel when you go. And I think what you're seen with, whether that be a change in bricks and mortar, whether that be a change in policy, whether that be a genuine improvement in how teams are operating, there's plenty of ways to leave legacy. But I definitely think, the perception of leadership legacy needs to move away from what I would call old school approach to race names, grandstands, mounting yard names. We've got to get away from what is very much a personalised view of what a good leader is. I think leadership and its legacy needs to almost be a silent success as you depart. There's a lot of short-term, low-hanging fruit gains that administrators, particularly with the churn we've seen, will seek to obtain. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're looking for advocacy. They're looking for people to come onto their, I won't say bandwagon, but certainly support their direction. The problem with that is the conversation that we repeat on a regular basis about what the big ticket items are gets lost in that noise. And I think the industry deserves movement and momentum, and we seem to go 6 steps forward and 8 steps back every time we have a churn of leadership, and we lose time and we just can't afford it. So I think having a deeper sense of conviction and having a deeper sense of capacity to share the challenge, it's not just up to administrators to come up with the resolve. Plenty of decades prior haven't been able to do that. So the issues are big, and the industry has evolved very, very rapidly from the days of the gentleman's agreement, and from the days I recall when I went down to Tasmania in 2005 when Betfair first moved down to Tassie, and we were maligned as an island. Taking on a corporate bookmaker at that time was repelled by the rest of the Australian industry. So times have changed, but we're still dealing with the same challenges and revenue opportunities, next generation participation, people actually wanting to be part of our industry are great challenges. And I think the broader responsibility of taking on those challenges is certainly being met by various quarters. And I'm enjoying the likes of Kick Up for Racing. I'm enjoying the support for animal welfare that is deserving. But I wish we could do that in plenty of other areas where we have a collective approach to solutions and problems.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because leadership's an interesting thing as well from a personal perspective. Chatting to Aaron Morrison, who's been the chair at RV for just over 12 months now, or 15 months now. He's said his role's evolved and he's probably had to evolve a little bit to be much more public facing, which is probably not Aaron's number one suit, but he's had to evolve the way that he approaches things, trust other people to get the job do people balance that? How do you balance that? I guess the need to be humble and probably a little bit like work as I do, not as I say I do, and the visibility that the roles often require. How do you balance that out, do you feel, Charlotte?
I think it's a fine balance. I think that there are plenty of leaders who move more to the dictatorship style, and perhaps from some perspectives that gets the job done, that makes decisions far more quickly. On the other hand, the public facing popularist, that can only last so long. So I think that middle ground of stepping into your a balance that isn't necessarily your natural disposition, where you're on show all the time. I genuinely see it as no different to how we treat footballers. They're on show the entire time because people are looking up to them to play as they do and with a standard of social cohesion that we expect. Not always meeting those standards, but I think for racing administrators and racing leaders, because there's plenty of leaders in the jockey ranks, breeder ranks. I think I'd certainly say on course, a lot of our teal coats were great leaders at Moonee Valley. It's about how you do your job, and it's about how you support a genuine team approach. And that isn't always going to be in your comfort zone. But I think the idea that a leader can always learn and be taught is one of the primary assets of a good leader, that they don't know everything. They're prepared to listen. They're prepared to absorb new information, and they might well be convinced of an opposition's perspective on things. I think that's incredibly important, that you can learn to evolve, but you can also not so much vacillate, but you can certainly see a different point of view and perhaps change your mind on that basis of a good argument and a good business case for that matter.
Yeah.
So how do you make those leadership roles in racing, I guess, appealing to the next generation? To me, sometimes jobs in racing or certainly administration, I feel like getting a job at a bar. Much prefer to be on the other side of the bar than working it. And racing feels a bit like that sometimes too, certainly. But how do you see that in attracting talented people to the industry?
Yeah, it's a great challenge, because I don't think a lot of those roles are promoted outside of racing itself. In terms of getting into Principal Racing Authority land, PRA isn't exactly something that the average Joe knows what it means, nor what it might represent, or what roles are involved. I think our saleability by way of a career has to come with that good leadership. It's people that are visible at the right time when it matters, and on the issues that matter to more than the industry. And I think that's the clincher, that talking about things that are topical in racing. Yes, they may be controversial. Yes, there are a lot of emotional elements associated with animal welfare, but talk about it. Make it part of the language and the narrative that is normalised in racing. It should be. I hear plenty of trainers talking, and I love hearing it. Plenty of trainers after their horses run, that they're not going to back up because they're just not sure they're 100%. There might be a niggle, but they're not going to push them. The trainers are playing a part in that leadership, and I love hearing that. That's become more of the normal narrative about welfare, as it should be. It's not about advertising what we do for welfare. It's about speaking to it with a sense of great normality. But I think, to your question about how do we attract people into racing, we've got to start sharing the opportunities. We're very inward looking as to, we recruit from within a lot of the time. I've certainly had the last 3 years experience in clubland has been very different to PRA land, and I'm very appreciative of that insight. Working for clubs is very much a public-facing role. You're on the ground for race meetings, on course, you're engaging with audience, whereas PRA land, you're often behind the scenes and dealing very directly with the racing industry itself, not so much the general public. So there's two public-facing elements that racing administrators can look at, but there's so many roles. I mean, I just think it's a very hidden niche environment, but such a satisfying and exciting industry to work in. No day is the same, and the exposure you have to the breadth of human beings is phenomenal. And I've been very privileged to have that exposure. So yeah, I just wish more people could be part of it.
Charlotte, I wanted to talk to you about parochialism, which is a part of racing, and it can sort of take its form in many ways, whether it's state by state, club by club, which no doubt you've experienced in the last few years. But you've also, it's probably driven by the fact that the experiences, there is a universal experience about administrating racing, making it work, but there is also specific local experience. You've got New South Wales caught up with its current political battles. There's a club VPRA dynamic in Victoria. You mentioned before, you've got Tasmania, New Zealand are moving towards dual code and have got challenges with that. You've got universal aspects such as welfare and other aspects as well, but there's local hotspots around that. How do racing leaders and racing executives sort of see beyond or solve the big problems, but also need to be focused on ensuring that the things are done at a local level, and that parochial aspect, or that dealing with your own backyard before you deal with the big picture stuff. I mean, how do you balance that, do you feel?
Yeah, I think it's really important to see the leadership model as one that supports an exchange and breadth of experience opportunity. Often you'll find that people stick to one state. They'll stay in one place, whether it be one club, whether it be one PRA, and they don't have that necessarily that outward experience of what other jurisdictions are going through, nor do they see their own role in the success of other jurisdictions around them. Certainly, I would say that the national concept of coming together to share those problems and share those intricacies of parochial demand and challenge, that would generally be the platform, and that would generally be the exchange of I suppose shared ideas. Because the one thing I would say, having gone from Victoria to Tassie to WA to Victoria and now to New Zealand, the issues are so similar, yet we're duplicating the effort everywhere. And from a parochial point of view, I'm certainly getting an appreciation in New Zealand. The recent change with Entain and the TAB New Zealand, that is bringing back similarities to Fortress WA in Western Australia, where non-privatised TAB, corporate bookmakers weren't allowed to sponsor any races in Western Australia across the three codes. It was a very parochial, and still is a very parochial landscape for wagering. I still bet with Tab Touch. So it's the brand that funds the industry, and that was drummed into all of us rightly, because that money goes back to the industry. Now, in New Zealand, different scenario altogether, but a very different market for wagering over in that country, and no borders involved in terms of state-to-state issues. So from my perspective, I'm looking at New Zealand saying, wow, the learnings out of Western Australia and Victoria, you guys have got such advantage here. Yet there's a huge propulsion at the moment for change in a really positive sense that I've picked up on. I've only been there 3.5 weeks, but wow, the energy for change and for improvement and for betterment is really apparent. It hits you in the face when you walk into the office in the best possible way. So I think you're right in that parochial issues often dominate, get our backyard right before we start worrying about the broader picture. But somehow we've got to get the two wheels cycling, simultaneously, that we've got to actually start addressing and learning from what each state is doing or not doing. My first approach to a lot of the work in New Zealand is, where has it worked before, where hasn't it worked before, and why? And why would it be different here? So I think we've got a lot of learnings. We just don't have the active, from what I see, and I'm certainly not, sitting on a national board of any sort, but I think that the sharing further down into organisations where there's this encouragement to exchange and share. There's a lot of subcommittees, don't get me wrong. I know that happens in welfare. I know it happens in stewards. So there are elements and pockets of PRA land that do exchange those ideas and do have very regular catch-ups and do learn from one another. I think the pattern's probably a big issue, a big issue for us that still hasn't been overcome. And is very topical at the moment. I think everyone's sick of talking about it, but the solution isn't an easy one, and I can't comprehend that we are still talking about it, but I also understand why, and that's frustrating, and that's not getting anyone. At the end of the day, I say I work in racing because I love the horse. Is the horse any better off? with what we're talking about and how we're managing our operations when it comes to the black type argument, is the horse any better off? And I think that's probably a piece that nationally, internationally, get on with it. It has to, the lean into the most uncomfortable conversations need to be had. And, I can easily say that as an outsider. I'm not sitting in those meetings. But the frustration's apparent. And I think, we need to stop talking about that as an issue. We need to start talking about positive elements of change coming in the industry that we're all going to be part of to make sure it happens.
On your NZTR role, you've been, as you say, been there for a few weeks, and sort of a leadership change at NZTR with Matt Balesti been there about 9 or 10 months or so, probably 9 months. What excites you about that role, and what is it that you're undertaking?
Yeah, I mean, my role as a consultant there, I'll be supporting Mitch and Dan and the team there, the executive team, Zach, Sam, on areas that across the thoroughbred code of welfare, racing, certainly their strategic outlook. Matt Balesti's certainly someone that has come in with a very clear plan to make things happen. And I admire that. He's very open and transparent. And earlier talking about leadership, the honesty he has hit me straight up in the first conversation we had. I liked his truth. He picked me up at the airport on my first morning there in Auckland, and made excuses for the dog hair in his car. And I thought, wow, the truth factor here, and he's probably going to hate me saying this, but we had a good hour and 40 minutes in the car. And I really respected the fact that, a CEO with that much challenge on his plate, he's 6 months into the role, that's, 8 months into the role, and he bothers to pick up a random consultant at the airport, but B, takes the time to have a discussion in the car. He's very hands-on with areas that he's been, dropped into the deep end of. He's arguably got challenges not of his making that have happened over time. And we're very good at retrospective blame in racing, I think. But the reality is we all play a part to where we've arrived at. And I think the idea of positive enhancement that Matt has with a full team approach, he's not a one-man band. He's very much about NZTR, proud of what they're planning to do, and bringing an energy that I haven't seen for quite some time in terms of PRA excitement. The appointments in the various roles, there's a great deal of youth. I say that as, a middle-aged woman. There's a great deal of youth involved, and I think that's exactly what you need. There's a great deal of pride involved. And there's a great deal of stakeholder engagement that isn't just a meet and greet. I haven't been privy to that as yet, but I've certainly seen the program and the schedule, and Matt's not a very still individual. He's on the move all the time, and they've got plenty of challenges there, but he's ready to hit them head on. And I think he was very insistent on bringing the right capability to make sure that those solutions could be arrived at. And he wants ideas, and he's prepared to bring people in to make sure it happens, and I credit him with that. So yeah, I'm excited about what's ahead. I've got a 12-month outlook there, but they've certainly welcomed me with open arms, and I'm really excited about what's ahead. Returning to PRA land is my passion. As I say, I've loved my time at the Valley and that club perspective, but PRA land is very long term. It's long-term planning, and that's something I get very excited about.
Charlotte, thank you so much for your time. It's great to catch up and have a chat through all those leadership. Great insight. We really appreciate your time. All the best in your new role, and we'll catch up along the way.
Thanks, Bren. Thanks, Tim.
The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. The catalogue for the 2026 English Classic Yearling Sale has been released, with 798 lots to be set to go under the hammer at Riverside Stables in Sydney from February 8th to 10th. Yearlings by 113 sires make up the book, including Leading Stallions, Extreme Choice, Snitzel, I'm Invincible, Zoo Star, Two Dart Hot, Wooten Bassett, Written Tycoon, and Street Boss, as well as a deep roster of emerging names. 14 first-season sires are represented, among them Animo, Artorias, Best of Bordeaux, Hitotsu in the Congo, Giacono, Profondo, and Top Ranked. 74 vendors will present yearlings. The vast majority are eligible for state-based incentives. The classic sale has produced 24 Group 1 winners since 2018, including the recent top-level performers Pride of Jenny, Sepples, Private Harry, and Skybird. Hong Kong star Void's Bubble is another notable graduate. Go to english.com.au to view the English Classic catalogue. All right, Tim, into the breeding thing. Late news today. I'll throw this one into the agenda. You just published, or just put out a story now, which is about to be published. Sad to hear about the death of St. Jean only weeks after a fairy tale Melbourne Cup win for his son, half yours. It's a brutal game, this stallion game, isn't it, Tim? I mean, you get a $3,000 stallion whose progeny win a Melbourne Cup, and it's a heartwarming fairy tale story. And 3 weeks later, you're they've having to euthanize him because of a paddock accident. It's just bizarre. It's just a sad situation, isn't it?
It's been a very tough breeding season for a lot of people. I'd say Coolmore, as we know, Wood and Bassett, and So You Think, and Raheen lost top ranked, and before the season, he was an old, obviously, champion. Snitzel had to be put down. It's not, I know stallions have been through and done great jobs, but it's just not an easy game. A lot of variables and unpredictable incidents, and feeling for Grant Rye there. It's done a lot of work, looking after that horse since 2017, since he went to start, and obviously done it the hard way and produced a absolute great horse. First Victorian side Melbourne Cup winner, I think, for quite some time, sort of since the late 70s, mid to late 70s. So feeling for Grant and the team there, and hopefully there's not many foals to come, or 2 and 3 year olds, and hopefully got a few mares in foal this year that maybe there's another good horse out there buying.
Yeah, it's a kick in the teeth, isn't it? You get your opportunity, and unfortunately, it's sort of the way things work out. He's a interesting son of Teofilo, and just amazing that he was able to produce a Melbourne Cup winner, given the the scarcity of Australian bred Melbourne Cup winners we've had of late. WA stallions get their chance to shine at this time of year, Tim. There's one thing I will put out there is that these 3 Group 1s, we spoke about the pattern before, but there's 3 Group 1s in the Pinnacles, and WA gives these opportunities for some of these stallions. And it was good to see Awesome Rock get, with Watch Me Rock winning the Rowe last week, get his opportunity. He was obviously a horse, Warwick Barr wrote a yarn last week about Awesome Rock. He's a horse that's probably remembered for losing an Australian Cup on protest and won a McKinnon Stakes, or whatever they were calling them, Champion Stakes, whatever it was called then, but eventually got a Group 1 in his resume, went back to the place where he was bred effectively, in or the people who breed him anyway, the Olives, at Goldfront, and was able to produce a Group 1 winner last week with Watch Me Rock. So hopefully that provides a bit of a boost along for him. It's just good to see, there's people who make these investments. There's very few WA stallions that have the opportunity. I think there's only 2 that have produced, him and Playing God, that have produced Group 1 winners from WA. Others who WA have produced Group 1 winners when they were further east. But it's just it's a good little story that we've got. Other stallions and it's smaller operators getting the opportunities to produce these quality horses, Tim.
The WA owners and trainers, there is the West Speed bonus scheme, and they do support their local sale and the breeding industry significantly and heavily. Yes, obviously a lot of the main trainers come east and buy yearlings and weanlings. The Simon Millers have gone and had great success buying Eastern States bred weanlings and taking them back and growing them out. But Playing God's doing fantastic stallion and having a little bit of success on the East Coast now. And Awesome Rock just churns out winners. That not again, commercially probably tough. They would be very hard to sell on the East Coast, but for a West Speed stallion, he gets winners and to get a nice Group 1 winner, a good horse. Ridgeport as well owned him. It's a big supporter of racing all over Australia and breeding, so good result for the Grant and Alana Williams as well.
Yeah, there's an article. I think he's the sixth stallion this season, in Australian season, to have a Group 1 winner, his first Group 1 winner. So, that's a good sign for that. But you wrote a piece during the week on the economics of standing stallions, with a bit of a pun there on the word economics. We've got an Irish Champion Stakes winner who's now standing in India, called economics. But also you use that as an example of how hard it is for stallion, or farms to take these horses on and make it work. You had a chat with Henry Plumtree about this. There's a handful of, star Europeans that come out to Australia or New Zealand. It's not a straightforward action of just, standing stallions and raking in the money, is it, Tim? It is a significant risk to put these stallions up in the first place.
As we've just spoken about, you can insure them, but still I think a lot of things can go wrong. And with that horse, Economics is by Night of Thunder, who'll be the champion stallion in Britain this year. So I think he's had 30 stakes winners this season over there in Europe, doing a great job. Night of Thunder obviously came down to Australia for only one season and produced, I think, 5 or 6 stakes winners from that crop. Very, very good stallion. But Economics, he bled twice, I think, at least once and twice, probably brought an end to his career for William Haggis. And I don't know what sort of type he was. I think Night of Thunder produces great racehorses, but they're not always the best types. And it's hard commercially to get that over the line sometimes. And stud masters in Australasia face that same predicament. They've got to look at, as Henry explained, they've got to look at the stallion. Okay, takes the Cambridge stud model is 4 years to try and break even through stallion noms and investment and hopefully the sales, and then hope they make it. That they look at the stallion, are we going to be able to get support for 4 years to at least break even or go close to breaking even? And because otherwise it's, a $5 million investment. They've got Chaldine, Shuttling, they've got Al Manzouri won the Irish Champion Stakes, same race as Economics. So it's a lot of big chunk of money to put up front and get back over 4 years. So they want to try and de-risk as much as possible, and that's why Economics has obviously ended up in India, and hopefully he might do a good job up there. You can't say definitively yes or no.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that can go on with stallions. Like we spoke before about, like obviously the situation with St. Jean, like you finally make a horse and then something tragic happens. There's other things. There's questions about fertility. This is a point we've sort of talked about, you and me. There's been discussions about whether fertility is an issue this year. For some reasons, a lot of mares are struggling to get in foal and whatever else. But there's so many factors. Like, you spoke about, we chatted about this morning, Tim, off air, but we talked about the fact that it's not just a fact whether, a stallion turns up if he's firing at 70%, it's a given. There's so many factors with the mares and how things work. And it's such an inexact game to try to actually work out, project longer term, that you've got to make money out of it. There's just so many things that can go wrong.
I've been speaking because there is, I guess if a breeder has a bad run, they go, oh, there's something going on in the waters or the weather or something while my mares didn't get in foal. Could be pot luck, possibly average management. Who knows? But there's so many factors of, the studs are very good now at monitoring, when a mare's cycling, look after the stallions. As we know, that fertility's increased significantly over the last sort of 3 decades, and I think they used to be able to serve 40 or 50 mares, and now they can serve up to 200 a season. So that science, veterinary science has improved a lot, but there's still, hundreds of factors to go into getting a mare in foal, and then they've also got to keep 45 days plus. So a lot can go wrong, but digging around, I'm not sure the fertility rates have dropped off significantly with the people I've spoken to. I think the other people saying it has is probably just, in a way, bad luck, variance, and unfortunate for them. And that's how tough it is to breed a horse. It's not easy.
No, certainly. It's a bit like bad barriers with trainers. They sit there and say it's a conspiracy. How can I come up with outside barriers all the time? You're like, well, that's just statistics, the way things work, isn't it? So it's funny how it works out. And I said the rewards for making a stallion are massive, but the challenges of getting there are also fairly huge. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. It's been another big spring for the Darley Stallions, with their progeny delivering it right across the carnival. In total, 38 stakes races were won, everything from those sharp early 2-year-olds through the major Group 1s. And while the Godolphin racing team certainly played their part, it was the Clyde-bred horses who really filled the sheet. They accounted for 26 of those 38 stakes wins. 4 Darley Stallions produced Group 1 winners this spring, spanning the whole range from 1,200 metres to 2,500 metres. Street Boss, Too Darn Hot, Harry Angel and Gayath all had multiple stakes winners across the carnival. Too Darn Hot's pre-Christmas 2-year-olds are flying again, taking out both the Jim Crack and the Darley Maribyrnong plate. And Bivouac notched his first Group 1 winner, Baywakt, who broke the track record of the Golden Rose with a rating of 108. Bivouac's also got a key runner in Saturday's Winterbottom Stakes. Bred well, buy well, win well. Darley. On to wagering, Tim, and we'll skip through this one relatively quickly, but there's a bit going on in this space at the moment. Obviously, federally, there's an issue, or there's obviously the ongoing discussion around the gambling ad reform continues to bubble along. It's an interesting one. pressure on this week sort of put on the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, to allow a conscience vote or an open vote across the Parliament for people to vote on a gambling ad ban and whether they approve of that or not. There's suggestion from backbenchers of both parties, both major parties, that this would actually get through Parliament. This political issue is not going away, Tim. I mean, it's fairly hot. Like at the moment, there's no movement from the government. There's likely to maybe hear something in the new year, but we've been saying that for a while. It's on the desk of Annika Wells, the communications minister, to progress this. But until it sort of gets resolved, you can't see the political pressure on this one going away.
No, and politically, there's so obviously the revenue, the taxation to states, and the impact, and I've just talked about media and advertising. There's that, lobby groups, and obviously on racing as well, as opposed to the hard left, or not, shouldn't say hard left, but those that are anti-gambling, want to sort of they've preferred gambling to probably be banned altogether almost. So the views are so skewed either side that trying to come up with a resolution or a what recommendations get enforced, it's still going back and forth on what's there politically to gain for the government. I guess is the tough one, and because there'll be a fallout either way.
Yeah, and there's the wagering industry has been waiting on this sort of bad day to be pulled off for 2.5 years, and they're still waiting for it. It's interesting enough. What was also interesting, Tim, and I mentioned it in my newsletter today for people to point that out, Andrew Wilkie, the Tasmanian, actually my local MP, the Tasmanian MP, he put a bill forward earlier this week. Now that it was no hope of progressing, so it won't happen. But he wanted to add greyhound racing to the list of banned sports to betting in Australia from a federal level. Now, we think this is a state-by-state issue, but those who are pressing for reform in this space and want to ban greyhound racing, and from there would, it doesn't take much of a leap to think, harness racing and thoroughbred racing could come in that scope as well. They're finding different ways to get this on the national agenda. So it's an interesting time for that. Another article there probably worth checking out is WA sort of throwing their support behind a national tote movement. Warwick Barr spoke to Ian Edwards recently, the Racing WWA CEO, about sort of their thoughts on the national tote. He still thinks that fixed odds is probably the way forward. Will still be the dominant going forward, but there is it's a chance for the tote to have a more meaningful presence with the Australian landscape if that happens. A story there also about Entain in New Zealand, and Andrew Burris, the CEO of the Australian and New Zealand business, saying that they're committed to that 25-year deal and they want to continue to grow and develop their relationship with New Zealand Racing and New Zealand TAB and continue the funding there. So that's an interesting one. Obviously, a lot going on about Entain at the moment, about where their direction's heading, and the Austrac action happening in Australia, which Burris said won't affect what happens in New Zealand. So, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out as well. The other one, Tim, which just sort of round off on the wagering space, putting up an article last week. The bookies have copped a bit of a hiding this spring, in which we all probably, as punters, might celebrate to say, hey, good to see the punters doing well. The challenge of that is that those lower bookie margins, and I think they lost around $25 million on Derby Day alone, means that less money flows back to the racing industry. So because the profitability of bookies, the gross profit is actually then feeds back to the racing authority. So I think it's sort of a funny one, isn't it, Tim? I think probably, we sort of sit there and think, it's a pretty, turnover goes up, we all get more money, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
I guess that's, PRAs have got all, and certainly Racing Victoria, as far as I know, they've attached themselves to that, wanting to have a gross profit sort of part of their revenue stream. And so I guess they've got to ride the ups and downs of race results. That's the stream of favourites. Get up like they did during Cup Week. Well, they've got to ride that potential revenue downturn. But from a longer term point of view, I think it's healthy for punters to have a good week and, have the money to reinvest. And that partly maybe why Melbourne Cup Day was, certainly the Cup was a record, and because they've had a good experience, they've won, and it is enjoyable to back a winner and keep reinvesting.
But to look at my own activities, Tim, I don't feel like I was that cashed up on Derby Day that I wanted to up my turnover in the Melbourne Cup, but others clearly had a lot more confidence than we did. And it's the nature of the job. It goes up and down, but we know over the long term, the bookies wins. It's the old job. That's why they drive Mercedes and we drive Ford Falcons. That's the way that it works, doesn't it, Tim? As I was told as a kid coming through. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and don't forget to subscribe to thestraight.com.au, an opportunity there to support our independent journalism and get access to all our featured articles and everything you need to read on the site. Send us an email at editor@thestraight.com.au. Let us know what you're thinking about, what we should be covering in this podcast, or other story ideas we may have. Thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.